Hello everyone, audiences. My presentation is students' learning involvement among host community and refugees. Or what I mean by students' learning involvement is 3 points. The first one is to what extent these students are active in class, so being active in discussions of the class, and being attentive and listening carefully in the class, and preparation before going into the classes. These 3 points are what I mean by students' learning involvement among host community and refugees. Host community, I mean the community or the students in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and refugees, I mean the Syrian refugees in there. Before going to the main points, I would like to talk in brief about education, refugee education in brief. According to human rights, education is a basic right for everyone, anywhere. So refugee education is not something new. Even after the World War, the term refugee education came up, but with the new conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, a new flood of refugees came to Europe and even America and Canada more than before. So again, this phenomena, it became the focus of many educational institutions, and in the view of education, many researches were conducted about that, and today it's one of the important points that educators can work on. So today there are thousands of Syrian refugees as a neighbor of Iraq are living in Iraq, and mainly in Kurdistan region in the north of Iraq. And it's a paradox that Iraq itself is one of the countries that many people they fled from Iraq to other countries, but today there are many Syrian refugees are living in Iraq. So according to UNHCR, the distribution of refugees in Iraq are like this, mostly in the north provinces in Kurdistan. As you see in Erbil, for example, 50% of the refugees are in this province. In Duhok, 54%, and Suleimani, 13%. And the other cities or provinces, there are some, but the main place, the main shelter for refugees are these 3 provinces, according to UNHCR. So we should know, before talking about anything, we should know what are the main things that for the educators should know about those people who are the education of those people who are refugees or asylum seekers in the countries. There are many things that the teachers, the administration staff, they face while teaching these people. One of them is cultural differences, that sometimes it can cause misunderstanding between the two sides, and language barriers that makes learning and teaching more difficult, and lack of understanding about educational resources. So, um, of course, when those people who are coming like from a very vulnerable situation, so many of them, they face trauma, psychological issues, so very difficult living situations, and training costs for those teachers who are teaching these people also is another problem for some countries. So generally, these are the difficulties that usually educational systems face while they have a program for refugee education. And the access to education among refugees and non-refugee people is very different. So sometimes there's a big gap between the same people who are living in the same country, between these two groups, refugees and non-refugees, or let's say host community. It can cause big gaps because the same facilities are not available for them. So here the role of educators or teachers is always very important, because they have to know how to adapt with the situation, how to manage it, how to create a welcoming atmosphere for them to have a better education. And so it also needs a kind of cultural awareness and like more understanding about the others and the situation they are living in. So according to many research in this field, that creating a welcoming environment for the refugees, it can cause better engagement in learning among the children or the students. And curriculum is also, it could be another point to talk about, because um, there's always a question. Those students who are refugees, they should study the same curriculum they had in the original country, or they should study, or they should follow the host country's curriculum. Of course, both had like negative and positive uh, effects, but now we are not talking about this. So about this study, so descriptive study survey, um, it's the participants are 8th and 9th graders at the basic school level, or what's called secondary school here in Iraq, and more specifically in the North Kurdistan region of Iraq. And the participants, of course, the local students or host community students and refugee students. So the questions of the research are which group are more involved in classroom learning? I mean, to what extent students are attentive and listening carefully while in class? Which group are more attentive? And which group is more prepared before going to the class? And also, which group are more involved in the discussions in the class? At the same time, there's a question about our students are satisfied with the school environment, and which one is more satisfied. So for this, we have hypotheses. The hypothesis are host community students are more involved in classroom learning because of the same factors we already talked about. We believe that they are more involved because the refugee students may have more problems that sometimes it prevent them to be more involved in the classes. And it could be both groups are not satisfied with the school environment because the infrastructure of the schools in Iraq and Kurdistan and for the refugees are not good enough. So the hypothesis is that they are not satisfied. The methodology for the data collection is, because it's a qualitative research, questionnaire was distributed among some selected schools in the 3 cities and the camps of these cities, the refugee camps in these cities. The number of participants are 171 students among the two groups. Basically, it's 84 refugee students and 87 host community students. It was also the parents are there. Data was collected from them, but my presentation here is about the students because of the time, and the focus here is on the students. The results shows that about the first question, that one of the questions that was which one are more prepared before going to the class. The data shows that 78.1 of the host community students answered with to the statement that they strongly agree or agree to the statement that yes, I prepare myself before going to the class. So they agreed with that statement, while 57.1 of refugee students agreed or strongly agreed with this statement. Yeah, as you see, the host community students are in blue and the Syrian or refugee students are in red. This is showing the to what extent they are preparing themselves before going into the classes. At the same time, about the question, are they attentive, or the statement was like this: I listen carefully and I'm attentive in the classroom while the teacher discussing the topics. 72.4 of the local students answered with agree or strongly agree with that, with the statement, but 79.5 refugee students, they agreed with the statement. So at the same time, the rate of those people, they were neutral or undecided about that. It was somehow high. 11.5 of them, they were neutral among the local students, and 27.4 of the refugee students also they showed that they undecided about to tell they are really attentive or listening carefully while in the class. As you see in the graph, that it shows that how many of them among the local and refugee students are attentive or listening carefully in the class. And to find out if the students are active in the discussions in the class, the data shows that 64.4 of the local students answered would agree or strongly agree, and only 38.1 of the refugee students agreed with the statement. So it was somehow low among the refugees. And at the same time, we found that there's a correlation between being prepared and being active in the class. So it was a significant correlation between these two variables. this is the graph that shows that which group is more active, and if you see that most of the refugee students are not active enough, it seems the difference is somehow big. Yeah, and about the last question, are the students are satisfied with the environment of the school? It was surprising that the refugee students were more satisfied than the host community students. This in the hypothesis we thought that that maybe the local students are more satisfied because the situation in the camps, the facilities in the schools in the camps are not good. So we assumed that they will not be satisfied, but the result was the opposite, that even 85.7 of the refugee students, they were satisfied with the environment of their schools, while only 75.5 of the host community students were satisfied with the environment of their schools. Yeah, as you see in the graph, that how many students are satisfied with the environment of their schools in there. And about the implications of the study, we found that the local students are more involved in learning in the classes than the refugee ones. That's in line with the first hypothesis, because the refugee students were not as active as the local students, but generally they are preparing themselves before going to the class, and the satisfaction rate of the student with the school environment, they are almost close, but even local students are less satisfied with the environment of the schools. So there are suggestions for further research. Maybe the best suggestions are the findings of the current study delineated that the refugee students are not active in classroom discussions. So teaching methods in refugee education can be investigated, because the way of teaching, cultural awareness, and how to deal with these people who are in vulnerable situation for the teachers is very important to make them more involved in the discussions in the classes. And why the local students in that rate is very high, they are unsatisfied with the environment of the schools, even more than the refugees. It could be because of the infrastructure of education in the region. So understanding this, why, it could be a good topic to be investigated in the future. And thank you so much for your attention.